Hello, this is Hamlet, and this is my Gold Challenge Mode guide to Skyreach. This zone is characterized by difficult trash packs where you have to pay a lot of attention to the individual abilities. Once you learn how to smoothly handle all of them, you should generally be able to complete the zone without heavy time pressure. At the start, we're going to pull a pack of 2 and a pack of 3. The most important mob in this clump is the Initiative the Rising Sun, which is a healer. It has a flash heal that you can interrupt, and it occasionally puts down these sun trinkets that you have to kill quickly or else they'll heal the entire group. The other mobs in this pull do damage in various forms. The Dervish puts down a storm that's important to move out of. The Blade Feather charges, doing damage to everyone in a line. And both of the Chakram Masters throw out chakrams in various patterns that can be a pain to dodge, especially for melee. It can all get very spiky. If someone dies, they can just res instantly, and they will be right back with you since you're right by the entrance. After this, we move up to this pack and the Patrol. Now, the Patrol is in a very bad spot here. On this run, we're just going to wait it out, even though it wastes some time. This was actually intended to be a warm-up and planning run. You'll see us pause for a few seconds here and there in order to discuss things, so we didn't think much of it when we had to wait for this patrol. If you've watched some of my other videos, then you'll see me comment at the end that we usually plan a route with about 30 to 60 seconds of cushion for a clean run, and we did that here, and we're basically just going to use up that cushion throughout the zone rather than having a lot of time left at the end. But it still is true that we saw no need to plan out to do any of these pulls more aggressively. With the patrol clear, we pull these 4. The Life Pact Familiar is bound to the Herald of Sunrise. When either of them hits 0 HP, the Familiar will sacrifice itself to heal the Herald to full. The Familiar has less HP, so you generally want to trigger that by bursting it down first. The Herald is a powerful healer, and you want to kill him next. He has Flash Heal, which can be interrupted. He has Solar Heal, which is a large, uninterruptible heal, but he will not cast it on himself, so that's why you're essentially required to single target him first. And finally, he puts down Solar Zone, which is an AoE on the ground that heals powerfully while he's in it, so you have to try to keep moving him out of it. So your basic plan on this pack is to burst down the Familiar and then the Herald as quickly as possible to stop the healing, and only then pay special attention to the other 2 mobs, which are simple mobs that you've already seen before in the first pull. The patrol can be pulled with that for a hard pull, or you can wait it out like we did. If your timing is really horrible like ours and you don't want to waste 30 seconds waiting for it to walk away, you can also just reset the zone and try again since you're only a minute in. Either way, we pulled the patrol separately here. The Solar Familiar casts Empower, which buffs an ally by 100% damage and healing, so you want to lock that down and burst it down first. As it dies, it casts Flashbang, which, if that completes, it disorients everyone in the party unless you face away from it, which is important to watch for, but you can also interrupt it. The Solar Flare and Chakram Master aren't too scary after that. The Chakram Master is just like the previous ones. He throws out the 4-way chakrams that float around, and he also puts down the static electrical one that you have to stand out of. This pull is easy, so we're going to pull it into the boss. We'll clump up here and then pre-pot and I'll charge in. The Lowborn Arakoa are small and will die easily to cleave. The Overlord, whose main purpose is to buff them, is totally harmless once they're dead. You don't even have to worry about him, you can just focus the boss and let him die to incidental damage. We do Bloodlust here. There's a choice of whether you want to Bloodlust here or at the second boss, and it depends mostly on whether you can reliably kill the second boss quickly enough without using it. If you can, it's a little nicer to use it here because this fight can have a lot of movement if it drags on, and it's good to cut it down. It also helps you just burst down this trash pull quickly to leave yourselves with just the boss. We have our range stand close to the door so that he drops his first 2 wind walls there, and then we move across to a clear quadrant because the next thing that's going to happen is the 4 winds. As long as you do that, it's very controlled, and your 4 winds will always move you through open space, and you never have to worry about running into a wind wall. As 4 winds is ending, position near the edge of the platform, ranged and healer at least, because someone is going to get the laser beam, which you're going to want to drag around near the edge of the platform. Ideally, you can take it back towards where the wind walls already were, so that you keep a defined side of the platform as where all the dangerous stuff is, and then an open side that you can handle for 4 winds. Soon after that ends, he's going to drop his 3rd wind wall, and now you can get back to the open space because the next thing that's going to happen is a 4 winds. Other than those positioning related abilities, he has Fan of Blades, which is damage and dot to the entire party, and a charge, which goes out in a line. So here's the second 4 wins. As I mentioned, you should have clean space for this, and you should be trying to kill him during or roughly around the end of this. Then you don't have to deal with another laser beam and moving around for more wind walls. So Bloodlust here helps if you can spare it, especially if you're going to kill trash at the same time. Now as soon as he dies, I see the Dread Raven moving across, so I quickly pull it to make sure we get it on its own. You can fight the Dread Raven together with one of the upcoming trash pulls, but it is quite an annoying mob to fight alongside other trash because it keeps tossing the tank around. So if you can spare the time, which you should be able to on this route, you can fight it separately. The Dread Raven tosses the tank backwards over its own shoulder, kind of the opposite of a usual knockback, and then charges towards where the tank lands. Make sure you don't get thrown off the edge. It's quite an easy mob to fight on its own. That's just a big hassle to deal with while you're fighting trash. After it's dying, you have a choice of whether you want to fight the left or the right trash pack on the way to Arachnath. We preferred the left because the one on the right has 2 healers, which makes the potential for it to slow down quite a bit. On the left, there are 2 Gale Callers who can cyclone party members, but reliable stuns and interrupts will keep that under control. So as soon as we pull the left pack and lay down our AoE stun rotation, we're going to start bursting down the Adept, who's the only healer here. He has similar abilities to the Herald of Sunrise we saw before, especially the solar heal, so you really want to kill him first without ever letting him get that off. We have interrupts on the Gale Callers to make sure nobody gets cycloned while we burst everything down, and then we're just left with an ordinary Chakram Master, as we've seen before. Then we move up into Arachnath's room, which has just 1 mob. This is an easy mob with very little HP. If he lives for a long time, he does a very annoying AoE attack, but if you're focusing him down on his own, he'll die before he ever does it. Some people try to pull the Trash Pack, the Arcanologist, and even the Dread Raven all at once, which is extremely difficult, and there is no need for it if your goal is a gold pace. Here we set up for Arachnath. We wind up waiting a few seconds since we discovered that if you pre-pot the Trash Pack, it's not quite ready yet for the boss, so that could be something to keep in mind. Everyone who did the first boss cleanly without getting hit by any of the avoidable damage will have this nifty buff on them that makes them dance nonstop for the rest of the zone, so make sure you get that. Arachnath is essentially just a DPS check. If you kill him before the 4th burst, your healer should have no trouble keeping you up. If you go past the 4th burst, it can be a challenge and people may have to use cooldowns more in order to make it. The only main issue is coordination on the beams. You can see even here on the first one, we miss one and let some healing go off, which is really unideal. But it's still possible to make it with a couple ticks, not much more than that though. And from a healer's perspective, you can see that as soon as the beams start with a burst during every channel of beams, the people who are taking the beams will take quite a lot of damage and you can fall behind very rapidly. So as a healer, this short fight is essentially just a throughput challenge. You start healing very aggressively from the moment people start taking damage, and you should be in good shape for the later bursts. Each burst does successively more damage, so it can get very hard around the 4th. People intelligently using personal defensive cooldowns and healing potions can really help here. As I mentioned, you should decide in advance if you need to use Bloodlust to ensure a safe kill time. It's entirely acceptable too, but if you can do the fight without it, it's preferable not to, especially since it may not be back up for effective use on the final boss. On positioning, our tank tanks Arachnath near the edge in between 2 potential laser spawn points, so he watches for those while the rest of us get the rest of the room. We could all probably have been closer to melee to make the coordination a little easier. I hit a Tranquility at the end for safety, but we wound up barely beating the 4th burst despite the errors at the start. Coming up after him are 2 pulls with 6 small birds each. You can do these together if you have army, but otherwise you should probably do them separately. The birds fixate a random target and do quite a lot of damage and a stacking debuff, so it's very, very easy to kill people rapidly if they're allowed to close to melee range. Use a stun rotation regardless of whether you're pulling 1 or 2 at the same time. We do that in addition to army. They're going to kill the army quite quickly as soon as the duration of our stuns is over, so our goal is basically to burst them down quite hard during the duration of whatever stuns we have. You can see I have 4 or 5 fixates on me as soon as the stuns wear off, so I'd have just exploded if I was in melee range. We also have some knockbacks to help protect us. Anyone who's melee DPS should be careful to have a major personal cooldown handy if they get targeted a lot. After those is another pack of 6. This one is different. It's 5 hatchlings and a whisperer. The whisperer can buff the birds, so your goal is generally to kill it first, ideally while keeping the group locked down with stuns as much as possible while you do. Once it's dead, the rest of the pack is very tame, and you just AoE it down, and then you get yourself set up for the boss. If you pre-potted on the previous packs of Sun Talons, then it should be back up in time to double pot the boss, which is perfectly fine. We're going to have well over a minute before we invis after finishing the boss, but we're not going to want to pre-pot the next trash pack. This boss, Rookron, is tricky on challenge mode. These piles of ash are very densely packed, and once a Phoenix ad starts flying around, it's going to be very impractical to try to kill it in a safe spot where it won't cause more to spawn. So you generally have two options whenever an ad spawns. One is to kill it immediately before it starts to move, generally with the help of a stun. The other is to have the target kite it for the entire rest of the fight, which needless to say is not necessarily ideal. Even letting it hit someone and taking the damage doesn't really work because that still counts as a death that can spawn other ads. So as you can see, this one we killed because we had a stun available from our monk. That's something you should plan out in advance, who's going to call whether you kill it or leave it, probably based on either where they spawn or what stuns you have available. It's especially good if you can kill the ones at the start because obviously you don't want to kite them around for the entire fight. Once you're later on in the fight, it's okay if someone has to kite for a little while. As far as quills, a tick or two won't kill you, but it does put a stacking debuff on you that increases damage taken from quills, so you have to be careful. If the tank is not in melee as soon as quills ends, then the boss will start casting Screech. Screech is amplified by the Quills debuff, but ordinary melee damage isn't, so your tank can easily handle the last few ticks of Quills in order to be in place, and if the group knows there's not going to be a Screech, then they can also take a couple ticks generally pretty safely. The only other important mechanic you have to know is the tank debuff. It gets cast quite frequently in challenge mode, every 5 seconds or so. The tank can watch for it by seeing when Rookron hits full energy. It's very important for them to correctly actively mitigate that to prevent the debuff application most of the time. 1 here and there is okay, but 2 in a row is quite deadly. We've killed all of our ads so far, which makes the second quills pretty easy. Sometimes if people are kiting, they have to do a slightly careful dance to avoid taking too much quills damage without getting hit by the ad. As soon as he dies, you can turn around and head into the wind tunnel. The wind tunnel is the same every time, so you should simply know the pattern. The birds are usually not an issue as long as you keep moving. The problem can arise if you accidentally run just behind someone else in the party, like I did here, and then you get clipped by every bird that they spawn and you die very easily. Normally, if you're running on your own, especially with a speed boost, any bird that you trigger will harmlessly come in right behind you. So if someone dies, they have no choice but to run back. It's not too far, but obviously wastes some amount of time. Although this does give you a chance to see what I was saying about the birds as I run through by myself. One issue is that there's a bug where sometimes if you reset the zone, the wind graphic does not appear, but the wind is always in the same place, so you should simply know the path anyway. Once you get to the top here, is going to be the last trash pull that we have to fight in this zone. There's a healer we've seen before, an Adept of the Dawn with a Life Pact familiar bound to it, 2 basic damage mobs, and a solar magnifier that can empower enemies. So you should kill either the magnifier first or the life pact and then the adept first. Either way, you want to use heavy stuns on the group if you have them. The adept does have solar heal, so if you're killing the magnifier first, you don't want to let a heal go off. And similarly, if you're killing the life pact and adept first, you want to make sure that empower casts get stopped as quickly as possible. As you're dealing with killing all of those, the dervish will probably die to incidental damage, and then you can just finish off the blade talon. The magnifier will do a self-destruct explosion when it dies, so make sure to finish it off cleanly. When fighting on this tiny platform, make sure to watch out for the storms created by the dervish, and also look for any sun trinkets created by the adept and burst them down quickly. Be careful of the Dread Raven walking by the door. It can be helpful to put a mark on him at some point as he goes by, so that as you try to move into the room, you can always see where he is. Our adept lived a little long here, but it's not the biggest deal as long as you have stuns to stop solar heal. If you followed this route, then you're done with trash at this point, and we're going to invis the entire final room, both of the AoE packs and the Grand Defense construct. The Dread Raven detects invis, so that's why you have to keep track of his position even if you're doing it this way. Make sure you know where he is, which side he's on. The room is a big circle, so you simply have to make sure you invis where he isn't. We wait for him to get a little away from us here and then run in behind him, and he's moved past the exit to the other side by the time we get there. We're going to run right past the Grand Defense construct, like I said, and into Varix's room. The construct will be standing just outside the boss room throughout the fight. Once the boss door closes, it won't procs aggro, but it will aggro if you ever splash damage onto it with something. So you generally can stand near the door, but you don't want to tank anything near there that you're DPSing. The boss starts away from the entrance, and you should have ample time on your invis to go all the way into the room so you can get away from the entrance into a safe spot before you pull her. We tank her pretty far from the entrance. When someone gets a solar zealot on them, they do want to be a little bit close to the entrance so there's enough time to DPS it down, but usually it's not too hard to get it over a short distance, especially if you have a stun. One trick is that when a solar zealot spawns way up in the air, if you target it right away and hit it with a ranged stun, it'll never do its cast or it picks someone up, and then you can ignore it and pretty much just kill it at your leisure. You can do that with Fist of Justice, with Asphyxiate, probably a few other things. As you're finishing off the first solar zealot, there will be the first lens flare. You can leave it pretty much anywhere as long as you don't leave a big annoying line across the room. Collecting some fire near the entrance, which is space you're not using anywhere, is fine. The first shield construct will be soon after that. Shield constructs don't do much damage, but they must be interrupted. So tank them by the boss and assign an interrupt to them, but you can do only incidental damage. You can also simply CC them at the door, especially the second one, and just leave it there for the rest of the fight. Those are the only abilities you have to deal with other than Solar Burst, which is a simple nuke she casts on the tank that you can throw any spare interrupts at. The fight is straightforward as long as you always remember what's coming next. If it's a zealot, don't be too close to the edge. If it's lasers, try to be out of the way, not leaving it in space that you need. And if it's a construct, remember whether you're going to be DPSing it or CCing it. You can see here right before the second construct comes out, we have a freeze trap left by the door, which is where they always spawn. And I'm leaving fire towards the back of the room pretty much out of the way of people. The buildup of fire can be a positioning issue, especially if the fight runs long, so you want to be careful. If you keep that under control, there shouldn't be too much that causes you trouble. There we accidentally broke the CC, but it's not a big deal if you bring it over and make sure you have an interrupt assigned to it and keep your focus on the boss. It looks like we're cutting it right down to the wire on time, but remember we had a lot of downtime during the run because we didn't have our strategy totally finalized yet. This route could easily have had a minute of cushion time if we had run it cleanly once more. With the invis of the final room, including the Dread Raven and the Grand Defense construct, we had that much time to spare without really even having to multi-pull anything too aggressively. So, if you've been following along with the videos, this will be your last challenge mode as it was ours. Congratulations if so, this is a big accomplishment. You can see us getting our Challenge Warlord achievement right here. We had a huge amount of fun doing them. I really enjoyed making these videos and I hope that they were helpful to you in all of your own attempts. As always, thank you for watching.